has started since. So this program has started last two months. We have already covered 4 sessions of this program, including epidemiology, then diagnosis, and of course one surgical session also has been included into the program. So today there will be a very interesting topic. It's a really systemic management of diabetic retinopathy, and to give this lecture we have our the dynamic Dr. Rajalakshmi from Chennai. So these are the schedule. This program was launched on 7th July. So Eco India has the programs through knowledge-based program. I would say this is a knowledge-based program and a case-based program, and we are part of this TOSI along with ECO. We are first topic is chosen the diabetic retinopathy, and subsequently we'll be going for the other topics. And we welcome all the spokes. Today with me, Dr. Sheila John, who will be introducing the course, and Dr. Padmaja Rani will moderate the topic. And of course, the speaker of this evening is none other than Dr. Rajalakshmi. So this is the today's agenda. After the directed lecture by Dr. Padmaja and Dr. Rajalakshmi, I request the spokes to come forward to ask questions. It's very important. Question answer session is more important than the giving a lecture here in this course. So with these few words, I thanks once again Eco India provided the platform for this interesting program of this enriching knowledge. It's a knowledge-based program. So I will not take much time. But before that, I would say that TOSI, the Teleophthalmic Society of India, started on 4th April of 2021. And we are having regular programs and regular meetings. And I welcome all the ophthalmologists of this country to become member of the society, because at the present circumstance of COVID, teleophthalmology or telemedicine is the answer for the treatment of the patients, particularly rural and unreached areas. So I request all to become a member of TOSI and strengthen the society for the forward course of action. So thank you very much. So now I will hand over the podium to Dr. Sheila John to say a few words and introduce today's speaker. Thank you. It is over to you, Dr. Sheila.
Our guest speaker for today is Dr. R. Rajalakshmi, who's head of medical retina in one of the premier institutions in the country, Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Specialty Center and Madras Diabetes Research Foundation. She's a senior consultant ophthalmologist with over 20 years of experience in the management of diabetic retinopathy and working at a tertiary care diabetes center. Her main interests are cost-effective screening for diabetic retinopathy. Her passion is ophthalmic research, and she has done her PhD from Tamil Nadu Dr. MGR University in a very interesting subject, diabetic retinopathy in young onset diabetes. She's also been a principal investigator and co-PI in multiple international collaborative diabetic retinopathy projects. She's a faculty and created modules for certificate course and diabetic retinopathy for physicians. Her focus of interest has been artificial intelligence-based screening of diabetic retinopathy using teleophthalmology. She has won Best Paper Award All India Ophthalmic Conference and published over 50 original research articles in national and international peer-reviewed journals and written chapters in diabetes and ophthalmic textbooks. A very warm welcome to her. Now I invite her to give a message.
Thank you, Dr. for your kind introduction. I just share my screen. Firstly, I would like to thank Tosi and Eco India for giving this opportunity to talk in this session. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening to all of you. My topic for the day, I'm an ophthalmologist working in a diabetic hospital. So I'm here to speak to you about the systemic management in diabetic retinopathy. And it's a pleasure talking to you in this evening. So basically, we are all aware that the major chronic complications of diabetes can be broadly classified as microvascular and macrovascular complications. The microvascular complications being retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy, and the macrovascular complications being cerebrovascular disease, cardiovascular disease, and peripheral vascular disease. These, why are we looking at all these complications? In the sense that the presence of one complication can always be a risk factor for the other complications. So it's important to know about the other comorbidities along with knowing about the control of that. So we just start off with a definition of diabetes. Diabetic retinopathy is the most specific microvascular ocular complication of diabetes, which can occur in both type 1 and type 2 diabetes due to prolonged uncontrolled hyperglycemia. And it is one of the important causes of preventable blindness. Here, I would like to emphasize two important words: prolonged and uncontrolled hyperglycemia, because these are the two most important risk factors that need to be controlled to take care of managed diabetic retinopathy. That is the longer duration of diabetes and uncontrolled diabetes. These are the major risk factors. So looking at this table shows us the risk factors associated with diabetic retinopathy. The non-modifiable risk factors are duration of diabetes, age of onset of diabetes, and possibly the type of diabetes and genetic factors. What interests us in the systemic management is the modifiable risk factors, mainly hyperglycemia, increased blood pressure, dyslipidemia, and treatment of presence of anemia. The other risk factors, of course, will be presence of diabetic kidney disease or nephropathy, cardiovascular disease, so presence of pregnancy and puberty, particularly in type 1 diabetes. So this is to just look at the risk factors, how the risk factors play a role. Here we have various risk factors like duration of diabetes, glycated hemoglobin, blood pressure, type of diabetes mentioned as variables. You see that for duration of diabetes for over 20 years, the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy in people with diabetes over 20 years goes up to 76%, almost like 3/4 of them have retinopathy. And here, if the HbA1c is above 9, more than half of them have retinopathy. The blood pressure being increased, presence of hypertension also increases the risk. In type 1 diabetes, more than 3/4 of them have retinopathy, whereas type 2 diabetes, the risk is a little lesser when compared to type 1 diabetes. This is results from the meta-analysis of 35 studies done across the world. So these risk factors have been established through various studies. So here, to look at two important vision-threatening complications, PDR and DME. Again, if you see PDR and type 1 diabetes, if they have more than 20 years of diabetes, the PDR risk increases by 15 times. So PDR in type 2 diabetes, for more than 20 years of diabetes, the risk goes up by 10 times. So the duration of diabetes is the key risk factor. So the longer duration of diabetes, it's important to ensure that these patients are screened for sight-threatening changes. Similarly, again, diabetic macular edema, the risk increases by 5 times whenever the duration of diabetes is over 20 years. So duration of diabetes is the most important non-modifiable risk factor. And it is the strongest predictor for development as well as progression of retinopathy. During the first 2 decades, that is almost like more than 95% of type 1 diabetes patients and more than 60% of type 2 diabetes patients will develop some level of retinopathy. It can even be mild, but they'll have some form of retinopathy. So whenever you see a patient who says they are having more than 10 to 15 years of diabetes, it's important to ensure that their fundus is examined. So how can we prevent? Diabetic retinopathy can be prevented by first taking care of and modifying the systemic risk factors. And understand, so hence first we have to understand the systemic risk factors. Only by understanding these risk factors and controlling the risk factors, we can prevent diabetic retinopathy. So we'll go on to the modifiable risk factors. We saw that there are many modifiable risk factors, the most important being hyperglycemia. So the severity of hyperglycemia is a key modifiable risk factor which is associated with diabetic retinopathy. There have been two important trials. One is called the DCCT, other trial is called UKPDS. In DCCT, what they have done is they have looked at tight control in type 1 diabetes. In UKPDS, they have looked at tight control of blood sugar levels in type 2 diabetes. Both these trials showed us that good glycemic control can slow the development of diabetic retinopathy, and it can also arrest the progression of diabetic retinopathy in type 1 diabetes as well as in type 2 diabetes. So in UKPDS study, they found that by giving an intensive therapy for glycemic control, the microvascular endpoints, not only retinopathy, even nephropathy, can reduce by 25%, and the need for laser is reduced by 29%. So it is not like which diabetic medication is being used, is it insulin or is it oral drugs? Whatever is the pharmacological therapy for the control of diabetes, if the risk factor, that is glycemic control, is there, that is the key in preventing retinopathy. So this is the EDIC study, which was a follow-up after the DCCT. You find that when the patients were followed up even after 7 to 10 years after they were enrolled, the progression of retinopathy is lesser in the intensive group. Even the macular edema is lesser, need for laser photocoagulation is lesser, presence of severe NPDR or PDR is lesser. So that is the importance of intensive control of diabetes right from the time of diagnosis of diabetes when compared to conventional treatment. That is very tight glycemic control, reducing the glycemic burden. So let us start here with, I was talking about good glycemic control. We'll start off with a case study to start off. Here we have a patient who has, as I told you, a long-term, he has both diabetes and hypertension for over 12 years. And the patient underwent, as you can see from here, he has a very uncontrolled diabetes, HbA1c is 11.5, blood pressure is also high, his cholesterol levels are also quite high. But on fundus examination, he has not yet started developing much changes. He has only mild NPDR changes and a vision of 6.6. The diabetologist, after looking at all the systemic parameters, has advised tight glycemic control, and he has started the patient on both oral hypoglycemic drugs as well as insulin. What happens is the patient immediately comes back within 3 months and says his vision is now blurred. Can any of you think why the vision could be blurred? Why is the vision getting blurred in this patient who had normal vision at baseline, but now the vision is getting blurred? So what we found out from the DCCT and UKPDS is that there is always a risk of early worsening of DR with sudden intensive control. If suddenly see HbA1c is around 11 and suddenly when it is brought under tight control, by bringing it down to 7, that can cause, see, from mild NPDR at baseline, suddenly the patient has developed a lot of cottonwood spots. There are some hard exudates, some multiple changes around the macula, and that is the reason why his vision has dropped. So we need sudden intensive glycemic control can produce worsening, so the patient should also be aware of it. The mechanism why this happens is because of the retinal blood flow gets reduced and there is a production of insulin-like growth factor in the liver. This is what causes worsening. So it is important to monitor retinopathy. Suddenly when there is sudden lowering of sugars, the physician should always ensure that the retinopathy is also monitored. However, in the long run, intensive control will help in progression. It is transient only. This worsening is transient. Then once the sugar level stabilizes, the worsening of retinopathy will not be there. So ideal HbA1c, what is the ideal level that HbA1c should be maintained to prevent progression of DRS? The HbA1c should be maintained below 7%. So in the DCCT and UKPDS, what we found that there is something called metabolic memory. That is, good glucose control has a lasting effect on microvascular complications. That is, in the intensive control group, what they found is even the early tight control, if they prevented progression of retinopathy, even to progression to PDR in 59%. Even later on, if their control was not good, early tight control of diabetes, that was remembered by the Muller cells in the retina, and it prevented progression of retinopathy. So early, suppose if there are patients, earlier they would have had poor control, and now later if the control is good also, it does not help. Early intensive control is very important to prevent development of retinopathy or delay the progression of diabetic retinopathy. This concept of metabolic memory or the legacy effect of good glycemic control was seen in both the DCCT and UK-PDS study. So it is important to advise our patients about early tight glycemic control. Next, we move on from glycemic control to what is the role of hypertension. Majority of our patients who have diabetes also have increased blood pressure or hypertension. We find that increased systolic blood pressure causes the risk of development of retinopathy, and diastolic blood pressure increase causes progression of diabetic retinopathy. So this will also increase the risk of PDR as well as DME. Why does this happen? Why does hypertension cause this? Is because the hypertension also causes upregulates the vascular endothelial growth factors, VEGF receptor 1 and 2 in the retinal endothelial cells. So this is how hypertension also causes worsening of diabetic retinopathy. So it's equally important to control the blood pressures in our patients who have diabetic retinopathy. So if there is tight blood pressure control, the progression of diabetic retinopathy is reduced by 34% as shown in the UK-PDS study, and the need for laser photocoagulation is also getting reduced. But BP control is not like blood sugar control. Like I told you, there is a metabolic memory for glycemic control. Patients don't have any worsening of retinopathy if they have early tight control. But BP control, you have to continuously keep the BP under control by BP medications. So, but the key take-home message is that both strict blood sugar control and blood pressure control, they have a very important role in decreasing the progression. That is, progression of retinopathy means progressing from mild to moderate, moderate to severe NPDR to PDR or vitreous hemorrhage. So next, the most important, we saw about blood sugar control, then we saw about blood pressure. Now we are seeing about the role of serum cholesterol or the lipid profile. There was a randomized clinical trial called the FIELD study. The FIELD study is phenofibrate intervention and event lowering study in diabetes. This was a study where they tried to give phenofibrate oral tablets to see if the need for laser for DR, that is for PDR or DME, is reduced by giving phenofibrate tablet. This tablet is given 200 milligram once daily, and they found that this reduces the need for laser photocoagulation both for PDR as well as for DME by 30%. But it was not exactly related to how much the cholesterol got down or anything of that sort. This is basically a PPAR alpha agonist, and the lipids, even if the lipid was not proportionally reduced also, it still had an effect of PDR and DME. There was another study called the ACCORD study, which used not only phenofibrate, but also used statins like atorvastatin, etc., and showed that 40% reduction in the need for laser for PDR. So this is what we know that our physicians, they will also prescribe tablets for dyslipidemia. Particularly, we can see the hard exudates in the macula coming down when the cholesterol levels reduce. Many of the patients with the cholesterol levels are coming down by use of statins. We see that the DME also is getting reduced. Next, we move on to anemia. We know that in India, because of nutritional problems, many of our patients, particularly women, they may even have nutritional anemia. If there is presence of anemia and if that is not addressed, particularly anemia can also be present in patients with nephropathy also. It leads to progression of DR, because what happens in diabetic retinopathy is there is retinal ischemia and hypoxia, and anemia leads to worsening or progression of DR by aggravating the hypoxia and the retina. So that stimulates the release of VEGF factors. And so that's why even in some patients, even after doing PRP laser for PDR, anemia can cause persistent new vessels or increased fresh new vessels even after a good PRP. Again, we saw in the first slide that other than diabetic retinopathy, nephropathy is an important microvascular complication of diabetes. So if there is associated nephropathy or microalbuminuria, we find that there is an increase in both PDR and DME in such patients. In Shankar Nethralaya, they did a particular study and they found that nephropathy, when it is treated by transplantation, the response, it helps to stabilize PDR much better than those patients who are on dialysis. So they find that it helps to stabilize. Sometimes, despite multiple sessions of PRP, we said that PDR is persistent. But the patients who had undergone renal transplant, they found that they responded much better and helped to stabilize PDR. So we have to take care whenever we have to check the estimated glomerular filtration rate. If that is reduced, what we find that if that is reduced, those physicians have to immediately send those patients to the ophthalmologist to ensure that they are checked for sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. This was a study which we did at our center, where we tried to correlate and see whether diabetic kidney disease has a role to play in sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. We found that whenever there is presence of kidney disease, it increased the risk of development of PDR or DME by 5 times when it was followed up over a period of 4 years. So this helps in targeted screening. So whenever you see the physician see a patient with kidney disease, they should promptly refer the patient to the ophthalmologist to screen for sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy. So next is cardiovascular disease, which is a macrovascular complications. Whenever there is diabetic retinopathy, it increases the risk for mortality due to cardiovascular disease, both in type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Again, if patients with PDR, the presence of PDR itself can be a risk indicator for development of myocardial infarction. And again, see, as ophthalmologists, we will all give intravitreal anti-VEGF injections for PDRs or DMEs, etc., or even for ARMDs, etc. We have to definitely check for history of recent MI or cardiovascular CVA or stroke prior to giving intravitreal injections. At least there should be a gap of 3 months if there has been a recent MI or stroke or CVA. So these are things which we also need to remember. Always check the systemic history. Some of the type 1 diabetes patients, and nowadays even type 2 diabetes patients, you can see some women may get pregnant during the, and whenever there is pregnancy, we have to always check the fundus. Women who have untreated PDR at the onset of pregnancy, the PDR may tend to progress very fast, because usually what happens is there will be poor glycemic control during pregnancy, and that will cause, and certain changes, which hormonal changes which happen during pregnancy will cause quick worsening of DR. So again, if they are already treated with PRP, it may not worsen much. But if the women who particularly become pregnant and the diabetes is not under good control, they have quick worsening. If you see them with mild NPDR prior to pregnancy, they may quickly progress to moderate severe within a matter of few months. And again, in pregnant women, what we need to remember as ophthalmologists is intravitreal anti-VEGFs are preferably avoided during pregnancy. There is no contraindication to doing laser during pregnancy. Everybody talks about vitamin D. Nowadays, there is no chance of getting exposed to sunlight. So India, vitamin D deficiency is becoming more and more common. What we found when we did a study analysis in our hospital was, we found that presence of vitamin D deficiency, that is vitamin D levels less than 20 nanograms per milliliter, was associated with 2 times higher risk for PDR. So we should always check for also vitamin D levels in these patients with diabetes. Let's move on to another interesting case. Now that we have listened to a lot of things about what is the importance of looking at glycemic control, blood pressure control, control of lipids, anemia, nephropathy, etc. We are now going on to the next case. Does anybody have any doubts with whatever we have discussed so far? Can we just see this case here? Okay. So this is one of our patients. This is a 62-year-old female, quite an obese patient with just a very short duration of diabetes, just 2 years of diabetes. Sugar control also seems to be very good. We were speaking about glycemic control, less than 7 should be, it is only 6.7. BP is under good control, urea creatinine is good. Patient is on oral hypoglycemic agent of pioglitazone. The patient is on pioglitazone 45 milligram per day. When we examined her fundus, we found that the patient is having diabetic macular edema, as you can see in this picture. What do you think, or what do you think could be the cause for this macular edema? She's not having long-term diabetes, sugar is under good control, BP is under good control, everything is good, she's only on OHA, but fundus is showing macular edema. What do you think could be the cause? Any guesses? This is where we need to know what medications the patient is taking for diabetes control. This is called glitazone-induced macular edema. Patients who are on glitazones, like I told you, the patient is on pioglitazone. There was a case study, study done where they found that patients who are using glitazones, they have almost 2.5 times or 3 times risk for developing diabetic macular edema. So whenever you see a patient with diabetic macular edema, we should always first check is what medicine the patient is taking for diabetes. Whether the patient is taking, earlier there was a drug called rosiglitazone. Now even now patients are using pioglitazone. It is a good drug for control of diabetes, but we have to be careful. Suppose the patient is having diabetic macular edema, you're seeing a lot of hard exudates, and the patient is also gaining weight. There is abdominal opacity, pedal edema is there. You have to always check, cross-consult with the diabetologist so that the dose of glitazones can be reduced or they can be stopped. So this is something that all ophthalmologists need to bear. We move on to another case. Now that we thought about glitazones, we know that many of the older patients, whether for their heart problem or for their kidney problem, many of our patients will be taking aspirin or they may be taking clopidogrel. All of you must be aware that many patients take. Nowadays, even during COVID times, we are seeing many patients are put on aspirin for even the treatment of COVID also, they are being put on to prevent deep vein thrombosis. Here we have a 61-year-old male who has a long-term diabetes, that is 18 years of type 2 diabetes. He is also on a combination of clopidogrel and aspirin because he was advised by the cardiologist because he is having IHT. Due to the progression of retinopathy, he developed, as seen in this picture, he has a large massive vitreous hemorrhage in one eye. Okay, so the other eye vision is fine. The eye in which he has vitreous hemorrhage, vision is dropped to 3/60. So he is quite concerned about his vision drop. So he checks on the Google and says some bleeding, means he says stop aspirin, somewhere it is written. Is there a role to stop aspirin if the patient is having bleeding in the eye? Is there, like you can see that some dentists will say, or before some surgery and all, some major surgeries will say, stop aspirin for 5 days, clopilate. But for PDR or a vitreous hemorrhage, is there a need? Would you ask this patient to stop? What do you think? There have been, the answer is there's no need to actually stop aspirin. There have been studies, even ETDRS, many other studies have shown that whether they have checked for both, whether aspirin is beneficial or whether aspirin can be harmful. They found that even in patients who have severe NPDR or PDR, there is no beneficial effect of aspirin on the progression of retinopathy. This was found out by the ETDRS study. But again, aspirin does not necessarily increase the occurrence. It is not that, okay, your patient is having PDR, just one NVE, that is new vessel elsewhere, no vitreous hemorrhage. Because the patient is taking aspirin, it does not mean they are at a risk for developing vitreous hemorrhage. So because the patient is having vitreous hemorrhage, he need not stop aspirin. There is no contraindication to using aspirin in patients with PDR or patients with vitreous hemorrhage if it is indicated for other medical conditions. We don't need to stop. Even for cataract surgeries, earlier people used to stop. Nowadays, because of clear corneal incisions, majority of the times, they don't stop. So here we see the first screen, we see that normal, mild NPDR, moderate NPDR, all these are the non-sight threatening lesions. Okay, these patients only glycemic control, controlling BP, etc. is enough. By controlling all this, we can just ensure that there is no worsening or progression of retinopathy. It is only when it progresses to severe NPDR, DME, PDR, or vitreous hemorrhage that the role for ophthalmologists takes place. The systemic management will be beneficial both in the upper stage as well as in this lower stage, particularly for progressing from this green to this orange. To prevent that, strict glycemic control will be essential. So systemic management will be drug therapy to reduce the modifiable risk factors. We have to screen our patients early to prevent progression from DR to sight-threatening DR. And of course, ocular management, all of us as ophthalmologists do ocular management, laser photocoagulation, intravitreal injections, or surgery vitrectomy. So why is systemic management important? Only about 5 to 10% of our patients actually have sight-threatening retinopathy. Majority of the 90% of them just with good systemic control, that is controlling the blood sugar, blood pressure and serum lipids will take care of the diabetic retinopathy. What is the role? Systemic management will prevent development of retinopathy, or it can delay the onset of retinopathy. Like instead of developing at 5 years or 10 years, they may still till 20 years of diabetes, they may not develop retinopathy. It can even reverse. Up to mild or even moderate diabetic retinopathy is reversible. There are patients who we have seen that even we would have recorded earlier 2 years back as moderate NPDR. Next time we'll see that they have come down to mild NPDR or even ODR. And it will also delay the progression of established retinopathy. So here in systemic management, control of these 3 factors, hypertension, hyperglycemia, and hyperlipidemia, control of these become essential. So what are the target levels? Of course, the diabetologist will know that you have to work with the physician. We as ophthalmologists cannot, but we can always advise our patients. We can check their HbA1c levels. How many of you check HbA1c levels for your patients? You should always check whenever you're seeing patients with diabetes, ask them if they have checked their HbA1c. Many patients won't know what their HbA1c is. They just say, I checked the sugar today morning, my random sugar was 250. They won't know what is 3-month average sugar control or HbA1c. This should be targeted and maintained less than 7%. Again, blood pressure is always better to reduce and maintain less than 130/80 for preventing progression of diabetic retinopathy. Again, cholesterol levels less than 200, triglycerides less than 150, LDL less than 100. These are just broad guidelines. Each person has to be individualized. We can't just generally mention these things. And most important is lifestyle modification. Without diet and exercise, just no medicines can work magic for diabetes or hypertension or dyslipidemia. So you have to give tips to your patients. What tips can you give? You can put up such posters in your clinics. Such say TRAC is one pseudonym, or ABCD is another pseudonym. TRAC is taking all your medications regularly. R is retinal examination annually. Add diet, healthy diet and physical activity to daily routine. Control the blood sugar, blood pressure and cholesterol, and kick the smoking habit. So this is TRAC. ABCD is also A1C. A refers to A1C less than 7%. B is control of blood pressure. C is control of cholesterol. D is diet. Okay. So ABCD. You can put up such pseudonyms in your clinics so that your patients can read when they are waiting to see you. So we have to start screening for type 1 diabetes. Within the first 3 to 5 years, they usually don't develop. But after that, every year, even type 1 diabetes patients need retina checkup. Type 1 diabetes usually occurs in younger age. So within first 3 to 5 years, within the age of 10, they usually don't develop retinopathy. After that, every year they have to undergo as per the ADA guidelines. In type 2 diabetes, it can be very silent. Some patients may not even know they have diabetes. They'll come for eye checkup. We will see they have retinopathy and then only they'll get diagnosed for diabetes. So right from the time of diagnosis of diabetes, they should have retina checkup done once a year. Okay. So we have to emphasize, and the diabetologist should tell the patients to go for eye checkup right from whenever they see a patient with type 2 diabetes. So all our patients need annual retinal screening checkup regularly, but we have a large number of over 77 million people with diabetes. That's why TOSI and ECHO is creating this program to increase awareness among the ophthalmologists. So here, other than ophthalmologists doing screening for retinopathy, we can use for screening, we can use artificial intelligence, wherein when photographs are taken through telemedicine, the pictures can undergo automatic assessment. See, we have used this AI in our center, where it gives the correct diagnosis of PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and clinically significant macular edema. The artificial intelligence algorithm, when possibly because we have to screen a large number of people with diabetes in India, using such AI algorithms wherever there are no ophthalmologists or in remote or rural areas, it can be very useful and the patient can be referred timely to the ophthalmologist. So this is a study which we did at our center, and we found this AI to be quite useful. We are using it also in some of our tele-ophthalmology services. So AI, we need not think it can replace an ophthalmologist. It can be used like a helpful assistant for the retinopathy detection. The rest of the work will be carried out by the ophthalmologist. So the key points from this today's didactic lecture is only 5 to 10% of diabetic retinopathy is sight threatening, and it requires referral to for further ocular management. 90% of the retinopathy can be managed just by good systemic control. So we have to remember that glycemic control has good metabolic memory. So the early years of good glycemic control, that is right from the time of diagnosis of diabetes, they have to maintain tight glycemic control because it is important in preventing development or progression of retinopathy. So it is a multifactorial approach which is needed to target control of hyperglycemia, control of blood pressure, and serum lipids along with lifestyle changes. So we have to educate our patients for lifestyle modification. Just 1% HbA1c reduction. Suppose the patient has HbA1c of 8, 1% reduction in HbA1c to 7 or 9 to 8. That 1% reduction can reduce the risk for diabetic retinopathy by 30%. So you just 1%. It is not a major 1% reduction is not tough for our patients at all. Ensure that even you use telemedicine or something to screen all our patients. You can use artificial intelligence in the future as we progress, and timely referral to the ophthalmologist for treatment so that none of our patients lose their vision due to diabetic retinopathy. Have their eyes checked periodically. This is our team with which we do work and screen all our diabetic patients at our hospital. And this is the message that I would like to convey. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
I think excellent talk, Rajalakshmi, and I think I really liked your track and ABCD. And ABCD is, of course, immediately I'm able to remember also, because probably ABCD is the first one to come rather than A for HbA1c, B for blood pressure, and C is cholesterol, and D is diet. I think that really signifies. Probably there is no disease other than where diabetic retinopathy is kind of an end organ damage, where systemic control is the most important, like as your lecture ultimately concludes that 95% can be managed by the systemic control. So, and we had one question from Anupriya. How will we manage a case of recent proliferative diabetic retinopathy in last term of pregnancy?
Thanks, Anupriya. See, there have been patients, as I said, laser photocoagulation, panretinal photocoagulation is not contraindicated during pregnancy. It doesn't have any impact on the fetus. If at all, you can avoid doing an FFA, because if you don't want to do an invasive procedure, you can take a plain fundus photography. OCT again is not contraindicated. The patient, of course, unless the patient may find it difficult to sit down for laser photocoagulation because of being in term. Otherwise, if the patient is able to sit down, you can use a slit lamp delivery and do a PRP or an IDO delivery of PRP. Of course, if there is a vitreous hemorrhage, possibly, and there are still a freshly done PRP, you can talk and discuss with the gynecologist also regarding avoiding probably a normal labor, and discuss regarding whether a Caesar is needed just to avoid strain. Otherwise, if already PRP has been done and it is a stable eye, even there's no contraindication to normal delivery.
If the same patient, for example, has a macular edema, so what you would go about, like how you want to deal with it?
Depends on the macular edema. We can do the OCT. If the macular edema, if at all it's a non-center involving DME, sometimes we have even seen patients where the first trimester they will have just moderate NPDR. Second trimester they progress to develop DME. And postpartum, I've even seen a nurse recently where postpartum you see that the X-rays have disappeared. That is because of the glycemic fluctuations. Very often it even reverses back when you do a 6 weeks postpartum, 6 weeks when you do a fundus examination, it reverses back. And as I mentioned during the lecture, it is better to avoid intravitreal anti-VEGF injections. They can be teratogenic. The role is not too sure. It's better to avoid anti-VEGFs during pregnancy, and it has to be a careful call, like a team discussion. It's a teamwork where the diabetologist, ophthalmologist, and the gynecologist, all three have to discuss.
Yeah, I think it's very important point you stressed upon that anti-VEGF should be contraindicated, and probably if at all, if it's a significant edema and you probably steroid can be sometimes can be chosen, but otherwise we need to understand that the OCT, whatever thickness you are seeing is in micrometers, it is not in kilometers. So just seeing some spaces in reflective spaces, don't think that edema need to be treated immediately. I think that is wonderful. And we also had a question from Sujata that any studies based on the role of obesity and its impact on progression of retinopathy.
Yeah. So obesity is also considered one of the important risk factors for diabetic retinopathy, particularly in type 2 diabetes. Even in type 1 diabetes, we find that retinopathy is more common in people with obese type 1. It is not at all type 1 will be lean, obese type 1. So again, the BMI also, control of BMI will definitely play an important role. In fact, we also find that sometimes, of course, in type 2, we have also seen that some PDR patients suddenly they'll start becoming very lean. They would have been obese earlier and they'll start becoming lean. So obesity also is definitely an important factor, not only for retinopathy, but for other macrovascular complications also. So I think that is where I think the lifestyle modification becomes the
key.
right.
I had one patient where patient was actually almost 104 kilos when she came to me, and she was a software professional, and she was having a proliferative diabetic retinopathy in both eyes with tractional detachment. In one eye, it actually progressed, and I advised her for surgery. And she said, I will try to maintain my sugar control. And then she was supposed to come in 1 week for surgery. And she went to her internist thing. And then she went on for something called a keto diet under supervision of an internist. And she had a reversal of diabetes. And surprisingly, the diabetic retinopathy has actually shown complete regression. And which is something very, very surprising. We have actually published also. That means these kind of dietary interventions under the supervision of your internist sometimes can change even the parameters, probably lifestyle. So any systemic control meetings, then we go to the physicians, they say the best insulin is the lifestyle changes and dietary interventions.
Correct. I agree. In fact, there is also a paper which was there was for very morbid obesity, that is BMI above 40, etc. Some of our patients, like as you said, over 120 kilos, 100, 120 kilos. Some of our patients who underwent bariatric surgery, because they were advised bariatric surgery more for the morbid obesity. Not we found that even their retinopathy, actually, though there was, again, as I told you about the transient worsening, which we spoke about, because of the sudden glycemic control, so BP is coming under control after bariatric surgery, sugar is coming under control, they are also eating lesser, etc. All that to put together, suddenly, initially there was a transient worsening, but after that we started noticing that the retinopathy, what I was thinking that they would probably, they are progressing fast, they suddenly started actually stabilizing post bariatric surgery. We had published about 30 cases of patients post bariatric surgery where there has been regression of retinopathy, two-step regression.
Dr. Rajlakshmi, I've got a question, rather I will discuss also. You must have come across a lot of COVID patients receiving a lot of steroids, you know.
Yes, sir.
So in these COVID patients, when the steroids has been given, and they might have worsened, because we are seeing now a lot of diabetic retinopathy patients having worsening. Probably this is effect of steroids given during the COVID period. Do you have any study or anything related to this? In this COVID period, there is a increased steroid usage has led to all these complications?
Yes, sir. We have actually, it is yet to be published, but we have just collected. There is a lot of newly diagnosed diabetes because of use of steroids. It also depends on how long the patients have been steroids. If they have been on steroids for a shorter period, but because many physicians have been independently without any guidelines, many physicians have even put some patients on steroids for even months together rather than just on 1 or 2 weeks. Those patients, particularly, they are also seeing some fresh retinopathy and worsening of retinopathy. Again, lack of follow-up during the COVID and lockdowns has definitely, we have seen some patients not coming for regular follow-up with even our intravitreal anti patients who have been given injections, etc. Lack of follow-up, sugars going up due to COVID, macular edema again worsening, PDR worsening, fresh vein occlusions, lot of new complications we've been seeing this year.
And also neurovascular glaucoma, sir. So a lot of cases have gone to neovascular glaucoma. So we did analyze our data of the COVID pandemic. What we found is there was during the lockdown time, the patients who came, of course, they came only when they had a severe sight-threatening problem. So there was a nearly 30% increase in the patients who were coming blind due to diabetic retinopathy during that pandemic, and that is continuing. It is not that, the post-pandemic also it is around 23%. So it is not
Yes.
that it is, we are going, and also as Rajlakshmi said, we also saw venous occlusion not only related to COVID affected patients, but also on the vaccination patients.
Vaccine, yeah. Vaccine also has induced
Yes.
vein obstruction.
Yeah. So we cannot say causal relationship exactly, we cannot prove in these cases, but even though the COVID induced diabetes is there, there is something about the virus also probably is playing a factor along with whatever the systemic problem that we are having.
Even there is a history of the viruses damage the beta cells leading to diabetes. Is there any evidence? There's some
There is
article.
no
it is
evidence,
from-
but there are speculations like that. People, whenever we are discussing, they're telling that the viral, it is not just diabetes only due to the steroid, because steroids we have been giving so many times for steroids, not just for COVID, but steroids are life-saving drug we use many times. But what happened in this COVID time is completely the virus plus the steroid is acting,
Correct.
havoc actually.
It's like multiple causes all put together. That I think that's the reason why the causal relationship is still yet to be, though there are many hypotheses, no single thing is got identified. We are publishing one set of all newly diagnosed diabetes in the past 1 year.
So I think one point you touched upon, Rajlakshmi, was about glomerular filtration rate, EGFR. Probably if you can share with because it's such a simple formula, but many of us, because you are in a center, like you are the best person to talk about systemic control because you have been in that. Where even though it's a simple formula, many of ophthalmologists, we don't know exactly that, it's such a simple formula, but we don't know how to use that and actually know the level of nephropathy.
So for EGFR is simple. Of course, Google itself, you go, all you need to know is the serum creatinine levels. With the serum creatinine level, gender and race. These are the small things. The formula comes on thing. You just need to enter whether male or female, and just you have to enter the creatinine levels. It gives us a value. Normally, there are 5 values. Normal people will be about 90. Anything is 90. And whenever it starts going below 60, that is the time when they say it is stage 3 kidney disease. And if it is below 45, below 30, below 15 is the worst, that is the end stage renal disease will be. So this, they say that more than looking only at microalbuminuria, because microalbuminuria can be even be present in other conditions also. It may not necessarily reflect diabetic kidney disease. So they say it is EGFR values are more specific for diabetic kidney disease than talking about microalbuminuria or macroalbuminuria alone. Can be induced by other factors also. So it is more specific. So one thing is that if you have the serum creatinine levels, you know the gender, the race, etc. It is a simple formula to be calculated. You just have to feed in, like how for BMI, we just feed in the height and weight. Similarly, in Google, there are calculators. There are 2 formulas available on Google. If you see the CKD APID is one formula. MDRC is another formula. There are 2 formulas. Either formula can be used. Both are equally giving reliable results. This is thing where we can always, like whenever there is diabetic macular edema, particularly, we always think of nephropathy. PDR and diabetic macular edema, particularly, we have to definitely, we find that the DKD needs to be assessed. Especially when we want to give even injections, etc. We always sometimes cross consult with the nephrologist also sometimes whether there is any contraindication, etc.
So I also want to know, especially when you want to do FFA, right? So is there any, like, you people really you do based on the EGFR value, like for example, when you suspect a nephropathy and based on EGFR level, anything like that?
Yes, definitely we do definitely look at EGFR levels, because whenever the age is below 45, we generally don't
avoid.
We preferably avoid. Now that we have ultra wide field fundus imaging, we have good OCT machines, etc. We are able to identify, unless there is a true indication like astrodialysis is there. Definitely, we FFA becomes very useful in patients with Otherwise, we don't really, FFA is not a compulsion in management of, it definitely provides a guideline for non-perfusion, etc. But it is not that management of sight-threatening retinopathy is impossible without FFA. So whenever needed, we do FFA. Otherwise, when it is, we always take an opinion from our physician. We don't, sometimes we take a call ourselves by looking at the systemic parameters, or we cross-consult with our physician before we do an FFA.
As you said, nephropathy and probably retinopathy are like a siblings. And whenever they have, especially these patients will also have a lot of macular ischemia. Just by doing serum creatinine, you can even grade how much severe level of nephropathy they have. And as your talk also you touched upon that these patients, when they go for transplantation, depending on their level of disease, sometimes you might have to refer them to nephropathy specialist, and that management can have a effect on the retinopathy as well.
Yes, correct. In
I have
fact,
a
we
question.
have one of our, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. No, you continue, finish. I just have a question for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
We in fact had one very interesting case. We had a type 1 diabetes patient whom I had seen she had extensive, though she was only 25 years old, she had extensive changes in her retina, all post PRP, no place even to give one more sitting of laser. And suddenly she didn't come for 1 or 2 years. And then we realized that through the Andhra scheme, insurance, she had undergone pancreatic as well as renal transplant. And so because she had also undergone a pancreatic transplant, so it was reversal of diabetes itself. So suddenly when I saw, there was not even, her HbA1c was like 5.4 or something. Because of that, it was like one new life again for her. I was looking suddenly so quiet, and after seeing her after 1 or 2 years, because she had not come in between, because at Apollo she underwent pancreatic as well as kidney transplant together. So it was like seeing her was like seeing eyes. I couldn't even see the pre and post pictures, but totally different. Yes, ma'am. Sheila, ma'am.
Yeah. Some of the pregnant women have diabetes during their pregnancy. What are the chances that they might have post-pregnancy?
Yeah.
So many of them have continued to have, or
Yes, usually GDM patients don't develop retinopathy, but sometimes many of our women, they don't even undergo a checkup to know whether they had diabetes prior to pregnancy. So we don't know whether it is GDM or they had type 2 diabetes earlier and they have become pregnant. So, but GDM patients, that's why postpartum, what they do is they do because HbA1c doesn't give reliable results normally in GDM. They use only fructosamine during pregnancy. And postpartum, 6 weeks postpartum, what they do is that is when they repeat they do the HbA1c. Sometimes some of the GDM patients progress to become type 2 diabetes. If they become type 2 diabetes, when they are checked postpartum, they continue like a normal patient, like every annual retina checkup for them, etc. But in GDM, we don't see any diabetic retinopathy changes.
When the mother is lactating, do you give oral diabetics or insulin?
I mean, that depends on, some of the drugs are contraindicated. Some oral drugs are contraindicated and some drugs are not contraindicated. That depends on what kind of drugs some patients are taking. Certain oral hypoglycemic drugs are not contraindicated. During pregnancy, majority of them, even if they are on type 2, they are put on insulin.
What is the incidence of anemia with the diabetes? After correction of anemia, does the diabetes reverse?
Not diabetes. I don't think with diabetes we have found anything in particular. Sometimes, in fact, anemia can mislead and show a very low. Suppose if the anemia hemoglobin is very low, it can mislead and show a lower HbA1c value also. We have seen patients, because of anemia, their HbA1c will look low. But it's more because of nephropathy, sometimes associated anemias that we see, or nutritional anemias also. Because once or twice we have seen patients where the patient had, we came to know that the patient had lot of anemia, lot of blot hemorrhages in the retina and things like that, more of flame-shaped hemorrhages, dot and blot hemorrhages, etc. We found that the hemoglobin was very low, and after she had undergone a hysterectomy or something, so after which she had become anemic. So once the anemia reversed itself, when we did a follow-up checkup, after we found that the retinopathy changes had also come down, but not directly related to diabetes. More in retinopathy is what we have seen.
So the fundus presentation is anemia due to anemia as well as diabetic retinopathy, both
Yes.
manifestations.
Both together, yes. That's why I think where we found, when we find that less of microaneurysms and more of dot and blot hemorrhages and superficial hemorrhages, the presentation of anemia with a lot of fundus CML patients with a florid, which many lesions which mimic diabetic retinopathy is what we see. Where when we did the peripheral smear, we have identified and diagnosed CML where the patient was totally asymptomatic also.
Yeah, I think here one interesting thing I would like to share is that I think chronic myeloid leukemia, one should keep in mind just doing a complete blood picture and peripheral blood smear. So I think some take home blood investigations that we can say complete blood, especially if you see unusual hemorrhages, just doing a one complete blood picture and so peripheral blood smear can clinch those diagnoses. And if you see a diabetic macular edema, which is if you have done a baseline FFA and it is not leaking there, and you just seeing OCT, sometimes a refractory macular edema, sometimes there can be even a hemoglobinopathies like multiple myeloma. So these are rare, but when they are seen like some unusual hemorrhages are there, one should think that there could be an underlying hemoglobinopathy.
Incidentally, to just mention, even that glitazone-induced macular edema, if you do an FFA, it doesn't leak on FFA.
Yes.
But you'll see a lot of hard exudates.
Yes.
So it doesn't leak on FFA. That's one of the ways where you can find out as it is glitazone-induced macular edema.
I think that nephropathy and low HbA1c is again very, very important, because the patient may think that his HbA1c is very good, and you if just only if we see HbA1c, it might look like normal, but because of lack of erythropoietin and anemia and nephropathy, again you are having actually the falsely low HbA1c. I think one should. So I think one important recommendation now everyone is telling about fenofibrate. That it should be given routinely and like that, because all these ACCARD and ACCARD follow-up studies, everyone is telling that the fenofibrate is having value. So what is your opinion, and what is your any practice that you do differently in your setup?
Here, one thing what I would say is generally the physicians prefer giving statins. Fenofibrates are generally given by them only when they see the triglyceride levels are very high, only they give fenofibrates. They don't give fenofibrates right away when they see dyslipidemia. One of the things is that again, fenofibrate, every medication that is given is a double-edged sword, like how even when you talk about steroids. Similarly, fenofibrates can have an impact on the renal status. So that's why though the field study came up, we don't find no ophthalmologist per se. We as ophthalmologists, we can't just say, okay, you have diabetic macular edema, I give you fenofibrate or things like that. We only refer to our physicians. But there has been no, after the field study, I don't see any study which has been actually done where they have put patients on fenofibrates in one arm, no fenofibrates in another arm, to actually see if how much of role it has. At least I have not seen any studies coming up after that much. But we as ophthalmologists, we have definitely seen in our own patients some macular edemas where we would just observe non-center involving DME with good glycemic control. Whether the physician uses statins or physician, usually if you can see that statin with fenofibrate is given as a combination. They don't give fenofibrates alone. They give atorvastatin with fenofibrate. That combination is being used, and we do find that macular edema comes down. I think there's also a group of publications from PJ at Chandigarh. I think they had Dr. Pankaj Dogra had.
In fact, they even showed that the foveal migration of the hard exudates something reduced in one pilot study. But I think this is probably a question for kind of a publication, not more than publication, maybe a study is required, because they said that the fenofibrate actually has a beneficial value even if your lipid levels are normal, because of its anti-inflammatory effects and all.
It need not, in fact, it doesn't in fact need to reduce the cholesterol levels, but it still has a role in reducing progression of PDR or DME.
I think we had excellent discussion.
Thanks, Padmaja. I think made Dr. Sheila, you made the session very lively. Thank you.
It's very interesting and
Very excellent lecture.
Audience
Thank you for delivering the lecture.
Diligent, and it was very interesting. It was never, because these are little offbeat topics, but they're lifeline topics also. So very good.
Absolutely
It's
right.
been a
Your
pleasure.
view
in
was
fact.
from the physician's point of view, no? Ophthalmologist with the physician's point of view. It's very interesting.
It's a, it's a wonderful
Yeah.
discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Dr. Subudip. Thank you so much.
You know,
Thank you, Dr.
Many,
Kanta.
many things we will learn from you.
I've learned because of working in a diabetic institution, sir.
Yes.
I thank you for giving the opportunity to share whatever I've learned by working here.
Absolutely right. We are looking
you so
forward
much.
to see you once again.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, sir.
Thank you so much.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you. Can we launch the poll?
Yeah.
Polling questions?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
We'll see the winners.
Yes.
Sweta is going to give us medals. Sweta, everyone is participating, no?
I think so. I mean, requesting please all the participants to fill up the poll. You can
Because I'm
see.
seeing here
Yeah.
0% participated.
Yeah. So to all the participants, please fill up the questions. That
This
is
is
your
not like you can tell them that their names will not come. It is for their learning.
Yeah, it's totally anonymous. So please, you can put up your answers on the screen.
It says polling is closed.
Shweta, is it done?
Ma'am, we can wait for some more time. 5 participants have answered. Then we can discuss one by one. Ma'am, we can discuss now the solutions, the questions one by one.
So,
Goal is a very good idea. It's very interactive actually. Yeah, go ahead, Rajalakshmi. You only have to.
so we start off with the first question. The most important non-modifiable risk factor associated with diabetic retinopathy. The options are anemia, cardiovascular disease, duration of diabetes, and smoking. We just showed in the first slide itself that the most important non-modifiable risk factor is the duration of diabetes. That is, the longer the duration of diabetes that they have, the better it is. Here again, almost 80% of them have given the correct answer. Duration of diabetes is the correct answer. So that's the key factor, non-modifiable risk factor. To reduce the risk of retinopathy or slow the progression of diabetic retinopathy, the target glycemic level should be maintained this 100% of them have given the correct answer. Kudos to all those who have participated. Less than 7% is the correct answer. So also, I just want to say we need not have a tighter control than that, because if we aim for very tight control, that also can cause worsening of TR. So targeting less than 7 is correct. I'm very happy to see 100% correct answers for this. The study which assessed the role of fenofibrate in the management of DR, this is, I think, a study question which has been a little difficult, I think, but the clue is there in the answer itself. If you see fenofibrate is mentioned in clue number 3, the field it says fenofibrate intervention. So a person who had managed to cure this an epidemiological study. It was just
Rajalakshmi, they thought that maybe our speaker is from Cures.
So field study is a study which looked at fenofibrate, the role of fenofibrate in the management of PDR, and that was where we were speaking about 200 milligram of fenofibrate once daily can reduce the need for laser photocoagulation. So answer number 3 is correct. 40% have got it correct. So DCCT is in type 1 for just for your info. So metabolic memory is just remembering that tight glycemic control at the beginning. So 40% have got it correct, but both of the above is mentioned by 3 of them. So good early intense glycemic control has a lasting effect on microvascular complications. Answer the first answer is correct. Both in dyslipidemia, there is no concept of metabolic memory. Metabolic memory, or it is called the legacy effect in UKPDS. Both are one and the same. This is seen only for good glycemic control, not for BP control or for cholesterol control. So answer, first one is the correct answer. Use of aspirin in people with diabetes for cardiovascular disease is contraindicated in people with DR if they have. So you have mixed responses in this. Some have written it is contraindicated. One person has written contraindicated in DME. 2 have written contraindicated in PDR. It is not contraindicated in any DR is the correct answer. Third answer is correct answer. So if your patients are taking aspirin for indicated by the cardiologist or by the nephrologist for some other health issues, they are taking aspirin, they can continue to take aspirin. Just because they have diabetic retinopathy or vitreous hemorrhage, there is no need to stop their aspirin. They can continue. Whether it is aspirin or clopidogrel or any other antiplatelet drug, it need not be stopped for the sake of retinopathy. This again, I'm very happy to see the last question with 100% correct answers. All patients with diabetic retinopathy need laser photocoagulation. No, not all need laser photocoagulation. Everyone needs glycemic control. So this answer to this question is the success of this program. I think we have emphasized the importance of glycemic control in management of diabetic retinopathy. Not everyone needs intravitreal or ocular surgery. So this again, seeing 100% the correct response for this also has been a wonderful experience. Thank you so much. thanks for the poll. I think the poll, as Padmaja meant, is very interesting to.
No, last one question is there. All patients with type 2 diabetes must have their first
sir.
retinal examination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas they have their first retinal examination, when the blood sugar is not under control, that is incorrect. It should, no, they should, when within the first 5 years is only for type 1. Only if they have any symptoms of blood vision, that is also incorrect. Fortunately, no one has found. At the time of diagnosis of diabetes, the majority have given the correct answer. It should be at the time of diagnosis of diabetes. Right from the time of diagnosis of diabetes, people with type 2 diabetes should have their first retinal examination. For question 7, for D is the correct answer.
Thank you. Very good.
So excellent question answer session. Good questions, sir. And well answered, Dr. Rajalakshmi. And I think our spokes are now well educated after this lecture. I hope. So this will continue like this, you know.
Yes, I think this is a very useful session, sir.
Yeah.
Dosi and with the support of ECHO. I think it's been, I'm being very happy and privileged to be a part of the session. Thank you so much.
To conclude this session, I thank Dr. Rajalakshmi giving a vivid picture of systemic management of diabetic retinopathy. And of course, Dr. Padmaja has made it lively by explaining and also moderating the session. We're thankful to both of you. And Dr. Sheila and myself, as facilitators, we have really facilitated the program very well today. And we got at one point of time, we had 55 participants, wonderful participants. So I think this was a really good session. And I thank ECHO India giving this platform and all the ECHO members with us. So thank you very much, Ms. Shweta and your team, and also Ms. Deepa and your team. What is nice session. We're looking forward to meet
Somebody
once
has
again.
raised their hand, sir.
Yes, sir.
Aditi Parshar has raised her hand.
Yeah, Dr. Sheila.
Dr. Aditi has raised her hand.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. It was an excellent presentation. I have just one last question. Ma'am, especially as far as the use of aspirin is concerned, especially in our patients with PDR. But so many times I've seen that patients of PDR, they are on who are taking aspirin. They're usually on aspirin like for whole of the week. So shouldn't it be like that if they're having severe PDRs or if they're having vitreous hemorrhages, then either the dose should be modified or they should rather skip a single dose? Shouldn't that be done? What is your call on that?
If sometimes like how when planning some surgeries, if they're posted for vitrectomy and at that particular point of time, you want that, you think that because you don't want your vessels to bleed during the course of surgery, etc. For that reason, if you think you want to stop aspirin, you can discuss with the physician. And usually like the way it is, and earlier you recall that cataract surgeries, when they were done initially, they were stopping aspirin when like we are doing SICS. Now after phaco's and minimally invasive MICS techniques and all that, we have stopped with clear corneal incisions nowadays and topical anesthesia where we are not giving blocks, etc. We are not stopping aspirin. Similarly for anti-VEGF injection, so sometimes people were stopping. Now for these things, we are not stopping. But if the patient is posted for surgery and you think that stopping aspirin for 5 days, there's no contraindication, it's better to discuss with the physician. Some patients can't be taken off aspirin. Some people will be on warfarin, many other heparin. So there are many other drugs which it is always better not for us as ophthalmologists to decide, but rather discuss with the physician. Just don't look at the eye alone. Just look at it as a whole patient rather than looking at it from the eye perspective alone. You can ask the physician whether it can be stopped. If there are physicians who think that stopping for 5 days, no issues, it can be stopped.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. We meet again 15th
Thank you.
September, Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Good night, everybody.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
sir. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.